Good morning, everybody. Well, after that beautiful music, we're going to hear a beautiful talk. And Anne Throup, who is an assistant professor at the Institute of Clinical Medicine in Copenhagen, will be speaking on familial high-risk studies. Why are they still relevant? The Danish high-risk and resilience study, status, results, and perspectives. And Anne has been the head, really running the study now for years, and so has really deep, intimate knowledge of all the aspects of the study. So I think you're going to be in for a real treat. So.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. And thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me to give this talk this morning. As Larry Seidman just mentioned, I'm working in the field of familial high risk and familial risk for severe mental illness. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist working as an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. Here you see some typical symbols from Denmark. It's sometimes claimed that the Danish people are among the most happy populations in the world. And yes, we have good fairy tales, and we have a lot of confidence in each other, and we have dark rye bread for lunch. But as I will tell you in a minute, maybe not all people are completely satisfied with their lives. So within the next 40 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about risk and take you very briefly through the evidence from former high-risk studies and argue for the relevance of our study. And then I'll tell you about the design and the very first results from the Danish high-risk and resilience study via 7. And that will lead me to the future perspectives in terms of follow-up and an intervention study that is just going to start. Okay, I recently went to a course at the Anna Freud Center in London. It was about risk assessment and risk factors. And the first message to take home was that there is no such thing as no risk. And then I found this one. Two ladies sitting and talking to each other, and one says, it's people's own fault if they get involved in an accident. And the other one says, yes, it's good, we never take any chances. And I just put it in here to remind us all that we can't control everything and that there is always a risk. So if we want to study or to identify individuals who are at a higher risk, and it's about schizophrenia and bipolar, since they are quite rare events in the population, then we need to know a lot about the etiology of the disorders. When do they actually start? What are the predictors, the risk factors, and the earliest signs of illness? And that's what we've been interested in our group for some years. The literature, the tradition of familial high-risk studies actually starts in 1952, where Barbara Fish conducted the New York infant study. And although it was a small study with only 12 children born to parents with schizophrenia and 12 controls, it has had a major impact. It was the study where the pan-induced maturation hypothesis was first proposed, about that these children have a global pattern of developmental delays. Then came other studies, and of course, when I'm from Denmark, I would mention the Copenhagen High-Risk Project, which is still, unfortunately, you could say the biggest study because it included 207 children born to 129 severely ill mothers ill from schizophrenia. And that was the study that reminded us about the importance of the environment around the children, and also they were the ones that could point out that the teachers' ratings of these children were among the best predictors of who turned psychotic later in life. In 2003, Niemi wrote a review about familial high-risk studies and concluded that children who are born with familial disposition for schizophrenia have a higher frequency of developmental delays or neurocognitive disabilities during childhood. And also she proposed the hypothesis that the genetic disposition interacts with unstable or unsupportive rearing environments. So it's an interaction between gene and environment. And together all these data supported the neurodevelopmental hypothesis. A more recent review was published earlier this year from Hameed and Lewis, And they conclude, after going through 18 familial high-risk studies, that obstetric and perinatal complications are more frequent among these individuals, that they score lower on motor development tests, and that they have impaired cognitive development in a range of areas. Also that these children show social behavioral problems and lower social competences at school, problems with emotion regulation, and that the mother-child interaction could be characterized by less proximity, less responsiveness, and more frequent anxious attachment style. And also that the parental mental state seriously affects the children's social lives. And when we look at adulthood, they conclude that 15 to 40% of these individuals will develop some kind of psychotic disorder in adulthood. So their conclusion was that children with familial high risk for severe mental illness and schizophrenia or psychotic disorder in particular show a deficit of deficits in a number of domains, and that these are persistent and stable over time and can be detected at an early time in childhood. But they also point out that former familial studies suffer from a range of bias, including very small sample sizes, lack of follow-up with good repeated measurements, and lack of focus on family environment, social cognition, emotional perception, and emotional regulation. So on the basis of this, we thought, and also, well, the most recent familial high-risk study started in 1994. That was the Edinburgh high-risk study. So on the basis of this, we thought it was time to start a new familial high-risk study, taking into account the developmental perspective of age. So all former studies, they included children from, for example, 6 to 18. But if we could include children at the same age, we would have a big advantage of that. Also, representativity could be a problem, since many populations, many former studies were based on parents attending a treatment. But if we could have a population-based sample, it would be a higher degree of representativity. And also, we have a lot of new methods and a lot of new knowledge about child development that we could include. And finally, but not least, we could combine the improvement of genetic analysis with the clinical data. As you may have noticed, I've now talked mostly about schizophrenia because that's what I know most about, but I think I should mention, and I am learning, something about bipolar disorder too. And this is a model developmental perspective proposed by Anne Duffy and her group that is putting the developmental approach also to bipolar disorder. And this model indicates that individuals with familial high risk for bipolar, they may start off in early childhood by having anxiety or developmental disorders or sleep disorders, and then later in early adolescence they may have adjustment problems or just a single episode of depression. Then in early adulthood it may be recurrent depression before the full-blown symptom picture of bipolar disorder is obvious. Another meta-analysis that has meant a lot to us was the one by Rasik and Ua in 2014, because they asked themselves, what a risk, but risk for what? And they showed that children who are born to parents with severe mental illness have an increased risk of developing not only the illness of their family, but also of other severe mental illnesses, here defined as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or major depression. So this was data based on 3,800 individuals, and they could show that children who are born to parents with schizophrenia, they also have an increased risk of developing bipolar disorder or major depression. And the same was for children born to parents with bipolar disorder. They also have an increased risk for developing schizophrenia and major depression. And these authors also conclude, and I think this is very important, that more than half of all individuals with familial risk for severe mental illness will develop some kind of mental illness during their life. This may also be anxiety or OCD or minor mental disorders, but 1/3 will develop a severe mental illness. So that is something else than what I learned at medical school, where it was told that the risk would be about 10%. So these were about diagnosis in adulthood, but then we started to wonder, what is the risk for these children with familial high risk for having a child and adolescent mental diagnosis? So we aim to investigate the incidence risk rates of having a child and adolescent mental illness in a population of individuals with familiar high risk for severe mental illness. And thanks to the good Danish registers, we were able to look for the answer here. Because we could take out a population of individuals born to parents with severe mental illness and look at their risks for having a mental illness before the age of 18. Altogether, from 1969 and until 2012, we were able to follow all these individuals. It was found that 155,000 individuals had a child and adolescent diagnosis during that period, and about 10% of them were born to parents with severe mental illness. And here you see the results. The columns to the left, that's all them with one ill parent, and here you see those with two ill parents. And the results are here that for all, both if you have a mother with bipolar or major depression, a mother with schizophrenia, father with affective or father with schizophrenia, the incidence risk rates were about doubled. And for those with two ill parents, it was about 3 to 4 times increased. We did not find any specific pattern of, like for example, that those born with disposition for bipolar disorder should show more anxiety. Rather, it was an unspecific pattern, but it was found for all diagnoses. If you prefer figures instead of tables, I'd just bring this one. It's the cumulative incidences from age 18, 0 to 18. The 4 upper lines, that's the ones with 2 ill parents. The lower blue line, that's the controls. And the 4 in the middle, that's those with 1 ill parent. What you can see here is that at age 18, about 20% of these individuals have developed some kind of mental disorder in childhood. One of my colleagues, Anne Running, who is a psychologist and recently defended her PhD and who will give a presentation later today, she used the same register data to help us get more knowledge about where these children live when they grow up. And I'm going to show you some of the results. Here you see children from the general population. The blue areas, that's all the children who live together with both biological parents. This is age 1 and it ends at age 17. Then when you look at children who has a mother with schizophrenia, the pattern is a little bit different. Not as many live with 2 parents, but more than 20% of them actually live with the ill mother. And the orange area in the top, that's all the children who do not live with any of their biological parents. These are the results if you have a father with schizophrenia, first from the general population again. And here again you see that if you have a father with schizophrenia, quite a larger amount live alone with the mother. And not that many live alone with the ill father though. But just to show you a pattern of how these families have things to struggle with. I think we should not talk about risk factors and risk assessment without talking about developmental traumatology, since there is a growing evidence of the impact of early childhood trauma and adverse life events. I'm not going to take you through this complicated model, but just use it as an illustration of how we think that early childhood trauma can affect fundamental biological systems like neurotransmitter systems, prefrontal cortex functioning, stress regulation, and that again will affect cognition, behavior, and thoughts in individuals. And now I'll tell you about the Danish High Risk and Resilience Study. As I mentioned, we tried to increase representativity, and also we used the Danish registers here. Everybody in Denmark has a personal identification number, and if you have a diagnosis, the diagnosis will be reported to a register linked to these personal identification numbers. So we were able to get a sample of all parents to a child age 7 who had a diagnosis now or had it earlier of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And in that way we could invite all the parents that were relevant. The VIA-7 is a unique and very good collaboration between adult psychiatry and child and adolescent psychiatry. And I think I heard yesterday that we're not the only country struggling with that collaboration, but here it succeeded. Here you see Professor Ole Mors and Professor Merete Nordentoft. They're both adult psychiatrists, and Professor Kirsten van Plessen, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And together with the neuropsychologist Jens Richard Jepsen and me, we performed the PI group. Then we had a very hardworking team of PhD students and research assistants who took care of the very hard data collection, and of course the 522 families. We had a very good and assertive and friendly nurse who called all these families. And no matter what kind of obstacles they could imagine, she had a good way of overcoming it. So for example, she could say, "Oh, do you want to bring your dog to the hospital because it doesn't want to stay at home alone? Oh, no problem, I'll find somebody who can walk it. What kind of food does it prefer?" Well, okay, we didn't bring dogs to the hospital, but you know, it's just the way of meeting these families that I wanted to illustrate. So here you see the flowchart, 522 children aged 7. 202 of them were born to parents with schizophrenia. 200 of them were controls, meaning that the parents did not have schizophrenia, not bipolar, but they could have something else. And 120 children born to parents with bipolar disorder. And please remember these colors, because I'm going to show you a lot of figures later, where the dark purple will be schizophrenia, the green will be control, and the bipolar will be light purple. Maybe you think that 522, that was a very odd number, and we think so too. But that was also Metta's flexible approach, because two families, they just insisted that they would only participate if they could include their smaller siblings when they reached the age of 7, and she couldn't resist that. This is an illustration of the domains that we tried to investigate that we thought were important when investigating child development factors. As you can see, we interviewed both the primary caregiver, who was often but not always the biological mother, and also the other parent. We sent questionnaires to the school teachers, we went for home visits, and the investigators were blinded to the illness status of the parent and to the high-risk status of the child. And of course, we made lots of tests and interviews and questionnaires with the child. All these domains, these are all the instruments, were much inspired from the review of Niemi, but also included more information about social cognition, genetic material, and family conditions. The raw testing time was more than 10 hours, and for a child of 7, you need to put in breaks and meals and things like that. So we met families 3 to 4 times. Now, I think we can admit now that with a large cohort like this and several family members in each family, it has been hard work. And I think our motto was, in the end, there will be obstacles, there will be doubters, there will be mistakes, but with hard work, there are no limits. Well, the clinical impression from the VIA 7 was that although it was a very long and extensive battery, the children did very well and actually enjoyed it. And having an adult sitting next to you who pays full attention and give you a lot of positive feedback while receiving a gift card at the end of the day was a positive experience to many children. Also, at the end of the testing, we could see that many of the children with familial disposition for severe mental illness showed subthreshold psychiatric symptoms and signs of developmental delays. And also we could see parent-child interaction that could be problematic sometimes. Also, many high-risk families, they were worried about if they transferred their illness to the child, and they were very happy that finally somebody were interested in their children, and they were also very pleased for the feedback that we could offer them in terms of that when all the testing was done, we just went through it with them and told them if something was very alarming, and all the things that were normal they were happy to hear about too. And it's important for me to see that there is a big variation in these families, and some of these families do very well. And that they take into account their own needs as an ill parent, but they also arrange their daily routines, so they take care of the child's needs. But now I'm going to tell you a story that is maybe not that positive. It's a story of Carla, who was, of course, 7-year-old. And she was the one who answered her mother's phone when we called her to invite her to participate. And she was trying to wake up her mother by saying, "I think it's somebody from your work, Mommy, please wake up." And then the mother came to the phone and we told her about the project and she accepted to participate. And then when we came to the address for the first time, we found out that she lived with her mother and her older half-brother. And he was hiding behind a closed door all the times we were there. He had his own mental problems, that was only we heard. They lived in a small apartment, and the girl's room was hoarded with all her things placed in the middle because they were going to paint the walls, but this has not been done for at least a year, so all the things has just been standing there. And the kitchen was not clean, it was things all over the place, and the mother was sleeping on the floor in the living room with the girl sleeping on the couch because the room was not available for the time being. And then the girl showed to behave quite younger than her 7 years, and she did not have any leisure activities because the mother had very changing and unpredictable working hours. And the child had specific problems with numbers. She could not count to 12, although she actually took first grade in school 2 times. And the girl sees her father every Wednesday from 2 to 6. He is suffering from schizophrenia, and he believes that he can he can feel other people's eyes in the back of his neck where they can interfere with his thoughts. So in this family, the mother was the parent, but obviously it was overwhelming for her to take care of 2 children. And we also diagnosed her with a mild to moderate depression. And now to the results. First, we would be interested in who participated, who accepted this invitation. If you look at the first line, altogether 18.3%, but a little bit higher in the schizophrenia group, we never got in touch with. We sent them letters, we tried to call them, but some people buy their talking time for their mobile phone in Netto or Aldi or wherever, and we could not look up those numbers. So we sent them 3 letters, but they never replied back. But of those that we did get in touch with, the number is 67% of all, and quite equally distributed between the 3 illness groups. Of those who accepted to participate in the VIA-7, we also invited them to participate in a genetic analysis study. You see the percentage here, about 85% of all, a little bit fewer in the schizophrenia group, accepted to participate in that. Actually, we have 300 trios. That means we have genetic material from mother, father, and child. In 54% of all families, it was the mother who was ill, and in 45% it was the father. And in 9 families, both parents were ill. 9 families ended the data collection before it was finished due to quite serious life events like their house burned down or one of the parents died. And no families withdrew their consent about using their data. So now I'll tell you a little bit about the parents who participated. First, I'd look at the PSP, Personal and Social Performance Scale. It's a scale from 0 to 100. We made as a semi-structured interview in combination with the scan diagnosis. And the higher score, the better functioning. And what you can see is that, not surprisingly, the ill parents score lower than the controls. But if we look at the well co-parent, we see the same pattern, although a little bit to a minor extent. Scoring under 60 here means that the parent is out of work, just to give you an impression of the scale. And if we looked at being out of work, we found a higher percentage in both illness groups compared to the controls, and also the same pattern for the co-parents. So these data indicate some kind of assortative mating, that also the well parent may have some problems. We also looked at education, and here you'll see the same pattern, that a larger proportion of those parents with schizophrenia have a lower education, while bipolar and control seem to look like each other at a bachelor level or higher. And again, the same pattern for the co-parents, again indicating assortative mating. I did not bring data about house owners or income, but believe me, the pattern is exactly the same. Now about the child. Where do the children live and how? First of all, I think we can say that parental mental illness affects family life. Here you see that 85% of the controlled children, they live together with both biological parents, while this was only true for 40% of the schizophrenia high-risk children and 53% of the bipolar. Around 60% live with their ill parent if the parent has schizophrenia, and 67% of those with bipolar. 37% of children disposed for schizophrenia live with a single parent, and 14% live with a single ill parent in the schizophrenia group, 11% in the bipolar. As I mentioned, we went on home visits in 503 families. We made a semi-structured interview called Home. It's based on 59 items. You score either a plus or a minus in 8 domains. And I put in a photo of a Pippi Longstocking in her house just to remind you all that it doesn't have to be a perfect home to get a lot of pluses. I'm not sure then how many pluses Pippi Longstocking would get, since there's no adult there. I'm not going to go through all the results, but just mention a few. One item was if the interviewer was presented to the child, or if the child was prepared that the interviewer would come. And this was not the case in 42% of the families with schizophrenia, compared to 20% of those of the controls. And also 12 and 15% of the illness groups answered that they had used some kind of physical punishment to their children, compared to 6% of the controls. And this is illegal in Denmark. So here you see the results. First, the mean score. That might not be the most informative one, but there is a significant difference. This instrument is more based on a cutoff score, that if you score lower than 40 pluses, this indicates that the home environment may not have the optimal level of stimulation and support to ensure the child's development. And here are the results. Here you see that 17% of the children born with disposition for schizophrenia, they live under conditions that, evaluated from the home interview, may not be completely sufficient in terms of stimulation and support. Now, we also interviewed the biological mother, also if she was not the actual caregiver, to know more about the factors during pregnancy. And here you can see that 10% of the mothers with schizophrenia said that the pregnancy was unwanted when they found out they were pregnant, and 40% said that it was unplanned. Further, that 26% took medication during pregnancy, and a little bit less in the bipolar group, and more than 1/3 smoked daily. So just indicators of early risk factors during pregnancy. We also interviewed them about serious life events under pregnancy from the age period 0 to 3 and 4 to 7 for the caregiver and for the child. We controlled these answers. We extracted the answers of having a parent with mental illness, because that would, of course, make a difference in the groups. But here you see the results. A larger proportion of in both illness groups said that there were 2 or more severe life events during pregnancy. These are the caregivers' answers, and again, a more frequent answer in the 2 illness groups. And for the child, again, a larger proportion say that they have had severe life events from 0 to 3 or 4 to 7. Severe life events could be somatic illness or death in a near family. It could be serious conflicts between partners. It could be serious problems with your job, or, of course, accidents and things like that. We had 18 categories, and we tried to, if the categories didn't fit, we wrote down the answer and found a category for it. Other early life factors that I think I should just mention could be loss of attachment figure before the age 7. About 1/5 in the 2 illness groups told that there had been a shift in who was the primary caregiver, or a loss of contact with one of the primary attachment figures. And about starting at school, almost 17% of the schizophrenia high-risk children, they started at a later age, maybe due to the parents did not find that the child was ready for school, but often it would be the kindergarten who would say at age 6, this child, it's too early for him to start at school. Now to the psychopathology of the children. We evaluated psychopathology in different ways. First of all, with the CBCL, Child Behavior Checklist. It's a questionnaire with more than 100 questions, is the child sometimes cruel to animals? Does the child have very few things that he likes to do? Things like that. And here you see the results. The higher score, the more symptoms of some kind of psychopathology. And to compare, if you have a child with ADHD or autism, the score would be around 60. If you have a non-clinical sample of the Danish norms, a normal child without any problems would score 15. And what you see is that the children with schizophrenia disposition and bipolar, they score in between the 60 and the 15. And exactly the same pattern was from the teachers. More than 85% of the teachers returned the questionnaire, so we think it's quite valid data. We also handed out the ADHD RS questionnaire. It's about ADHD. It has 3 domains: hyperactivity, impulsivity, and behavior. Here you see the answers first from the teacher and then from the parent. This is the total score. And what you see is that the mean difference on the raw score is especially the children with the schizophrenia disposition. They score higher than the controls. That's the green line here. This does not mean that the child has ADHD, but just that there were more observable symptoms, and that the teacher and the parent or the caregiver, they score almost the same, see the same. We also made a KittySats interview. This is a screening diagnostic interview that you make first interview with the mother and then with the child or the actual caregiver. We found an increased risk of having a lifetime diagnosis, and remember this is before age 7, in the 2 illness groups. Actually 40% of those with schizophrenia and 35% of those disposed for bipolar disorder. But also we found a diagnosis in almost 17% of the control groups. But this could be also kind of, for example, a separation anxiety at age 5 and then it was over. So this is lifetime diagnosis. If you want to know what diagnoses were the most common, I put in this table. You can see anxiety, ADHD, and adjustment disorders. These were the most common. We also looked at the child's level of functioning, since sometimes having a symptom or 2 may not mean that you don't function well, or the other way around, you don't have a diagnosis, but you have problems in functioning. This is a scale called Children's Global Assessment Scale. It's also from 0 to 100. The higher score, the better functioning. And you see the same pattern again, that especially those children born to parents with schizophrenia, they score lower than the other 2 groups. Here, scoring under 60 means that you have problems in 2 domains that also would be recognized from a person who does not know the child very well. That's the definition of the scale. We have a lot of data that's ready to be analyzed or will be ready to be analyzed in a moment. I'm just going to go very briefly through a few results from the neurocognition database, and lots of more results will be revealed later today. Here I'll just show you the general intelligence and the executive functioning. As you can see, the schizophrenia high-risk score lower than the 2 other groups. We used BRIEF, which is a questionnaire about executive functioning, capturing the child's ability to regulate emotions, to be flexible, but also to plan and structure daily activities. Here you have the higher score, the more problems with executive functioning. And again, you see a significant difference, and actually more pronounced from the teacher's rating, maybe because they see them in a more complex context. And finally, the motor function that also is going to be elaborated on later today at a symposium. We made the motor, the ABC, which is a 45-minute test with the children, investigating both fine motor skills, balance, and gross motor skills. And here again you see the controls are the green line, and especially the dark purple score significantly lower in fine motor skills and balance. And this is in accordance with a meta-analysis that one of the PhD students, Birgitte Klee-Burton, made recently, who concluded that the motor function was impaired in children born to parents with schizophrenia. So our clinical data support this. So the conclusion from VIA 7 so far is that children who are born to parents with schizophrenia and to a minor extent also bipolar disorder, they do suffer from developmental difficulties and subthreshold problems early in life, and this time we found it and confirmed it in a representative sample of 522 children, all at the same age. Results concerning neurocognition and social functioning and motor were marked, but at least in my opinion, the findings regarding home environment, the early life factors, and the social status of the families were striking and alarming. So, this little guy may hope for that his bag is loaded with resilience before all these clouds start to rain. So, of course, when we started this cohort, we had the idea that it would be a good idea to follow them. So all families have been prepared that we will contact them again, actually, at New Year, in the beginning of the new year. The first follow-up will then be at age 11, exactly 4 years after VIA 7. That gives us the possibility of having 2 measurements before puberty, which, to our knowledge, has not been done before. Again, we'll send letters to the family's address, and we will email them and contact them by phone afterwards. It's, again, 3 or 4 days of testing, including a home visit, and we will arrange the practical things for them. And don't give us any more good ideas about what to include in the battery, because there's so much you want to know about these children. But we will this time include blood samples and MRI scans. We'll make an update on the child development and the psychopathology, and also the neuro and social cognition. We will, as I mentioned, go to home visits. We will investigate the parental mental health status. We will look at the emotional climate in the family, again, attachment, and also level of physical activity and sleep quality, the use of social media, and bullying assessed in a virtual reality environment. So, I think we have enough evidence to state that these children are vulnerable and more vulnerable than others, and they represent a group that it would be reasonable and realistic to approach with a more preventive strategy. And I think prevention is a major challenge for psychiatry. In other words, it's time to stop sitting on our hands waiting for these children to fall ill. It's time to start doing something. And when I say doing something, I will bring this model in. This illustrates how all the risk factors keep being added on to the life of the child, and the tower of building blocks will get out of balance. But if we could do something at an early phase and stabilize this tower, maybe we could change that perspective. So we developed a new idea that we call VIA Family, based on the focus groups interviews that we made with the parents, but also the literature. From a schizophrenia bulletin last summer, it was stated that parents with psychosis generally receive psychopharmacological and psychosocial treatments without any specialized features that support their caregiver role. And that was exactly what the parents told us. That when they go to adult psychiatrists, they talk about symptoms and medication, but nobody asked about their family. And if they try to get help to their child, the child and adolescent psychiatrists say he doesn't have enough symptoms yet. And they were afraid to ask for help in the municipality. And also that it was really hard for them to find their way through complex public systems. So we are trying to make an integrated, specialized, non-stigmatizing, flexible and tailor-made intervention for families with children having a parent diagnosed with a severe mental illness. And now we've discussed a lot in our group if I should show you this photo or not. But it's not meant as an advertisement for IKEA, but rather that VIA Family or IKEA Family is like a club that every kind of family could be a member of, and that it would help you coming over, the stressy family life with the hectic daily routines. So this would make things a little bit easier. So that's the signal we wanted to send. So here is the model. We want to combine knowledge from child and adolescent psychiatry with adult psychiatry with social services from the municipality together in a team that we call VIA Family. And the idea is that every family will be assigned to a team consisting of a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a child psychologist, an experienced adult psychiatric nurse, and 2 social workers from the municipality, one of them being a family counselor. So each family will just have one of these persons as a case manager who will coordinate all appointments and pave the way to the right expertise. And the intervention would last 18 months. And the basic elements would be to ensure that all families get help to talk to their children about the illness, since psychoeducation, individually based psychoeducation, means a great deal for these children's thoughts about their parents and the family's well-being. And also we want to provide parental training for those who would be accepting that, with a model of PPP. And as I mentioned, the case manager, and then easy and early access to early child psychiatric treatment, also for those minor mental problems like psychosis-like symptoms, anxiety, attention problems, or behavioral problems. Other elements could be that together with the family, the case manager could make a safety plan. What to do if dad gets psychotic a Saturday night and mom needs to take him to the hospital? Who could we contact for help? It could also be treatment optimization of the ill parent and maybe lifestyle factors for all family members. It could also be practical or financial support, because sometimes actually the possibility in the municipality is there to get an adult friend to take this guy to football or whatever would be a good thing for the children. And also the case manager could help the families about who to talk to, how to communicate about this family's special situation, if relevant. Okay, this is just a model of PPP. We chose PPP because it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's the only parental training program that is very tailor-made. It's always based on collaboration between the case manager and the parents. And you start here at a level 1 or 2, which is like public information, flyers and talks. And then more intensive could be level 3, which would be group seminars, and 4 and 5 could be individual sessions, always at the minimum of what would be needed to solve the problem that the parents have defined, but always with the possibility of adding more on if needed. And the basic things is to help the parents to develop more self-regulation through self-sufficiency, self-efficacy, self-management, personal agency, and problem solving. So that's just the basic principles. Okay, the outcome measures would be the daily functioning of the child, the CBCL, the psychopathology score again, and also absence from school. We have the possibility of seeing if these children come to school regular and if improvement of the family functioning and reducing the stress in the family, that's what we hope, would increase the child's going to school. And this is going to be a randomized study, so half of the parents or the families will have treatment as usual, and the other half would have the intervention. I don't know if I happened to convince you, but we succeeded in convincing the Danish Ministry of Health that this was a good idea, so they recently gave us 2 million euro to start this together with the Throup Foundation. So we will start soon, and please stay tuned. We'll be back with more results. Thank you. Could I just have a final remark? So, okay, what we're hoping is that the VIA family will enhance the resilience of these families. Here you see resilience as a balance, an adaptive dynamic strategy. If the negative outcomes take over, the child will get in high risk, and if we could add something on the positive outcomes, we could change that balance. So, I forgot, and I definitely don't have time for the limitations, so I'll just go very briefly through this. That children who are born to parents with severe mental illness are vulnerable due to a wide range of risk factors, and many of them can be identified at an early age. And families with severe mental illness do not get any specific help for their children and their family life. It's time to start early preventive interventions to reduce stress and risk of childhood trauma, and VIA Family is one attempt to do so. I know there are others working in the same field. So no limitations, but just a thanks to my team. Don't wait till you reach your goal to be proud of yourself. Be proud of every step you make toward reaching that goal. And then thank you for all your attention and to all my collaborators. Thank you so much.
Okay. I think not. Unfortunately, no time for question, but thanks. Yeah, well, yeah, that's the plan. You know, like there's another talk coming, but thanks a lot for a very clear talk and fantastic data. We're looking forward to the follow-up, and which is great, is that you not only look at what happens to these kids, but also how to prevent, and I think this is very important. So thanks for that, and to the next session.